Deschidem vinul românesc, program inițiat de Carrefour România, susținător al producătorilor locali de vinuri din 2019.
Dragilor, bine ați venit la un nou episod al podcastului Wines of Romania. Acest podcast este unul foarte special din numeroase motive, dar vă spun mai multe în următoarele minute. Acest podcast este inspirat de programul național Deschidem vinul românesc. Sunt Marinela Ardelean, iar în următoarele minute vom afla noutăți în materie de trenduri, stiluri de vinuri, de la unul dintre cei mai apreciați critici la nivel internațional, Robert Joseph. Welcome to Wines of Romania Podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's very good to be talking to you.
How is your Romanian, Robert?
My Romanian is almost non-existent, but I can understand a little bit. Yeah.
I would like to invite you to share with our audience something or some curiosities or useful insights about your experience and your career. What I very much love, for example, is the fact that you like to call yourself wine thinker.
Well, you have wine drinkers, and I think why should we not have a wine thinker? Actually, there are so many different kinds of wine from all over the world, different prices, different styles. And one of the complicating things about wine is that it all comes in the same bottle, more or less, in the same shape, the same. And how do you know why this one tastes like this and that one tastes like that? But also, why is he drinking this one, she drinking that one, and then tomorrow they might both be drinking something completely different. So I've spent the first, 20 years of my career were as a wine critic, publishing a magazine, writing in a newspaper, running many wine competitions all over the world. And in those days, I was really focusing, like most wine critics, wine experts, if you like, on why this wine tastes the way it does. Is it the soil? Is it the grape? Is it the hill? Is it the winemaking? All sorts of things. Why is it to make this one better than that one? Or had a different character. For the last 20 years, roughly since 2005, I've been more and more focused on the second part of this, why people are buying one rather than the other. And I'm kind of accepting that this Bordeaux is like this Romanian Fetiasco is like that. That's a given, if you like. And even whether they're good or bad, I'm kind of putting to one side. I'm wanting to know why that one is appealing to people and this one is not appealing to people, and why this one is more appealing or less appealing than it was before. And also, I think, over the years, I've had a lot of disputes with people when I say, look, a bottle of wine is not a magical, special, mysterious product. Yes, it is. The liquid is mysterious. The fact that one tastes different can be very mysterious. But ultimately, it's a product that we buy with cash we have had to earn. And if I don't buy a bottle of wine, I could buy a cake, or I could buy a book, or I could buy something else. So I don't have to buy that wine. All wine, to me, ultimately, is a luxury, unless you're an alcoholic. So unless you need that alcohol to get through the day, in which case you could buy vodka, you are buying wine in preference to spending your money on something else. Why do you do that?
Robert, when you think of the Romanian wine, what's the first thing that comes to your head, to your mind?
Lots of things. When you ask the first thing, I would say progress. Because I've been around, as I was saying, for a long time. I was around in the days before 1990. I remember collectivized wines from all of Eastern Europe. And we saw some quite nice wines from Romania, from Hungary, from Bulgaria. Those were probably the main countries, and Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. But none of them was special, let's be honest. And then I remember seeing immediately after the wall came down, the changes everywhere, the investment, people coming from Corsica, people coming from England, people coming within Romania, and a rediscovery And I think that's been something that I've been following closely. However, because you asked me to be very frank and honest in this conversation, and I do some work in Moldova, I'm doing some work in Georgia, and I follow a lot of these countries quite closely. It's interesting to me that all of these years, 30 years after the wall came down, we are still seeing Romanian wine being mostly sold in Romania and the countries around Romania. We're seeing the same applies to, even more so, I would say, to Bulgaria, to each of these countries. I think Georgia and Slovenia are probably the two countries from the old bloc that have made the greatest success in being seen as premium wines outside, in the rest of the world, if you like. Croatia is coming up. But even Hungary, with the history of Tokai, isn't really doing it. And to me, the challenge for all of these countries is to be on shelves in New York, in London, and in Berlin. But I have to say that it's not easy for an Australian winery or a South African winery to be on shelves in New York or Berlin. So there's no magic bullet anywhere to say, oh, look, if you just did this or you just did that, it would be very simple. We also have some very complicated questions if you like, intellectual questions. And I feel very sorry for my friends who are producers in Romania and in a number of other countries, where you are going to get two people coming through your door to talk to you. On the one hand, you're going to have somebody coming in saying, you have grapes that nobody grows anywhere else in the world. Please focus on these. Please don't grow Cabernet Sauvignon. Please don't grow Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, those international grapes. Leave those to France, and the New World, Australia, California, and so on. And then you're going to get somebody else walking through your door who is a buyer from a big supermarket, or even somebody in Romania quite possibly saying, please, can I have some Cabernet Sauvignon? Please, can I have some Merlot? Please, can I have some Sauvignon Blanc? Because we want to buy it. And so even if I put Romania to one side, Turkey is a very good example of a country with ancient grapes. And it's had all of that, if you like, pressure from outside saying, hey, focus on Turkish grapes that nobody can pronounce. And yet every time I go to Ankara, I pass through Ankara or Istanbul airport quite often, what do I see? I see Syrah, I see Sauvignon, I see Chardonnay, I see Cabernet. And to me, when my Western friend will say, this is a tragedy, this is wrong. And I say, excuse me, do you expect all German men to wear lederhosen? No. Do we expect everyone in Britain to go around in bowler hats or whatever? To me, it's really colonialization to say to anyone from any one country to say to any other country how they should behave, and to say to people in Bucharest that they shouldn't eat pizza because it's not traditional in Bucharest. But I could have a Romanian restaurant in London. Doesn't work. But that's a big question. How does a country like Romania make its reputation in the world with either its versions of those international grapes or its indigenous grapes that all these people in other countries have never heard of, have never experienced, and maybe are not necessarily going to buy when they've been given the option of buying wines from some regions and styles they used to.
I know your huge experience with Wines of Moldova, and because you just mentioned that you are going to be very frank and sincere at the same time, would you make a comparison between Wines of Moldova and Wines of Romania outside?
It's tough. I would say today, and I would say this if my friends from Moldova were sitting next to me, there's no question that Romania is way further ahead of this game. Apart from anything else, Romania has the advantage of being in the EU. That opens all of the doors. Whether it's easy to go through the door is another question, but the door is open. Not so easy for Moldova, not so easy to transport wine, literally, samples, all those sort of things. Secondly, everybody, with or without the EU, Romania is a country that hopefully most children, when they've left school, have an idea that it exists. They may be not able to place it exactly on the map, but it's in their head. And if you're selling any product, awareness of the brand is important. Moldova doesn't have brand awareness. So that's a major problem, I think, for them. It's also, again, let's be very honest, it's not a rich country. So it hasn't had the amount of investment from outside and even from within that Romania has had. However, there are some pretty dynamic companies that are pretty well funded. There has been some pretty good NGO money coming in from USAID and others. And I tread very carefully here, especially when I'm talking quite possibly to a Romanian audience, but quite possibly a Moldovan audience as well. Everybody's speaking the same language. You know, I live in Britain, where we have England, we have Scotland, we have Wales, and Wales, they're all part of the United Kingdom, but at some time in the foreseeable future, it may well be that Scotland is not, and Northern Ireland is not, and even Wales is not. And what will be the differences between those countries? So when I'm in Moldova, I am very aware that I'm with people who are very close to Romania in terms of language, in terms of history, and so on. So yes, there is a proud independence, which I think we would see in Scotland, if you like, in the same way. But just as I would expect Scotland and England to be very much brother and sister, I see that continuing. And I think we will see more and more cooperation between the countries. Obviously, Porcari is a good example of how that already happens. But I think also, because Moldova is an independent country, which has, as we've said, not had much money and has had historically to grow from a low financial base, which was focused on wine. Now we're seeing a flowering of design and technology and other things that arguably Ukraine got to earlier and one for other countries got to earlier. But we're now seeing that flowering, I think, very encouragingly. And I was just taking part in an event in Paris, which was called the 10 Years of Moldovan Revolution. I think that's a fair point. If I look back 10 years ago, I think Romania was already way ahead. Moldova has really had to move a lot further in the last 10 years. And yes, it's still behind Romania. What I would say, and this is maybe more controversial, today I would like to see the countries of Central and Eastern Europe working more together, because it's not easy for any one of them to make their name in, as I said, in America or in China or anywhere in the world. And I think it wouldn't be a bad thing, because we see such good wines from all of these countries. In a way, I'd rather see the best producers from several countries marching together, saying we are all on that part of the map, rather than a whole country, possibly from the base to the top, trying to make its name. And I think that will be as true for Romania as it would for anywhere else.
Would work in the case of Italy and France? Would you ever see Italy and France promoting together?
It's a very good question, but I don't think it's an entirely fair question, because Italy and France have got such a long history, a separate history within the mainland of Europe.
They have the brand.
However, I would say, and I think you could have an interesting conversation about Spain and Portugal, for example. So, and I think that I could see Germany and Austria, for example. And Germany is not a great success in exports, and Austria is. So it would be perhaps a little strange to see Germany relying on the success of Grüne Veltliner to promote some of its Rieslings, but it's not completely out of order. The same applies to Portugal, which makes wonderful, good value wines. So does Spain, but Spain is selling huge amounts of bulk wine to France and elsewhere. In a way, I would love to see both of those countries get more recognition for more of their wines than they get, or more appreciation for more of their wines than they get.
Robert, would you be so kind to describe briefly your career?
How briefly can I get? Basically, my parents accidentally ended up owning a hotel, which they didn't intend to do. They had no background in hotels or food or hospitality or drink. They didn't know very much about wine. They drank wine. They enjoyed it. I grew up as an only child. I was fascinated I was collecting stamps for a while, which is relevant because I saw these bottles of wine and I thought the labels were like stamps. I thought there's a story behind each of these. What does it mean? And I was very lucky. We had an Italian maitre d' called Mario, who came from Naples, I think, who understood that I was a little bit interested, and he kept giving me the wine left from bottles and saying, this is this and this is that.
Which age?
I was probably around 12, 13, 14. And then at around 15, 16, probably, my French wasn't necessarily as good as it could have been. I can't remember, but anyway, one of the people who supplied wine to our hotel, said, well, how about going to Champagne for 2 or 3 weeks? Even at that age, I was already interested. I thought that would be good. And the first thing, in those days, I went to Charles Heidsieck, which is still one of my favorite champagne houses, in the days when it belonged to the family. So Jean-Marc Heidsieck came and picked me up at the station, and he lent me a bicycle and took me to the winery. And the next day, I was put on the bottling line. And I think I did 2 days or 3 days in the bottling line. And I think I did 2 or 3 days riddling, bottling, moving the bottle. And it was very clever because it meant that if I really wanted to go home, that was what I would have done. And I didn't. I fell briefly in love with the daughter of the guy running the bottling line. And I went to their house for dinner. And I realized that what they were drinking in the house was liter bottles of wine from southern France. And suddenly the romance of all of these people drinking wine from their region, they couldn't afford to do that. Later on, I went to live in Burgundy, and the same thing applied. I lived in Burgundy for 5 or 6 years. I went there for thinking I would learn all about Burgundy in 6 months, and it took longer. And I still didn't learn it all. But even in Burgundy, in my village, very few people in my village could afford to drink Burgundy. And that was when Burgundy was a lot cheaper than it is today. So that understanding, and also one of the things I learned then was that appellations were questionable. And in Burgundy, they were particularly questionable. So I learned quite quickly. I worked with some growers. I worked for the broker who was selling wine in the States. I learned very quickly that someone like Michel Lafarge, who I was lucky enough to meet in Volnay, made Bourgogne Rouge that was 10 times better than the Clos Vougeot Grand Cru from the Négociant up there. So I learned quite quickly that just as today we see Leroy selling Aligoté, which used to be cheap as anything when I lived in Burgundy, and you added blackcurrant to it to make Kir. Today you pay more for a Leroy Aligoté than you do for some people's Puligny Marché. Is it better? That's a whole other question. But I learned that it wasn't the appellation, it was the producer. So I learned a lot about terroir and little plots of land. If you live in Burgundy, you have to. I came back to England, was given the chance to start a magazine, and almost immediately was invited to Australia, and that was the biggest shock. It was like going from the sauna into the ice bath, or vice versa, probably more vice versa, in fact. And because Australia was not all, there were a lot of big wineries, it was great varieties, it was complete, and people were very open in terms of what they were talking about. It was a complete shock to my system. And I realized that model worked as well. And so I could see the Burgundy model was one thing, and you see it, here we are in Germany, these little Riesling vineyards, but also big wines, big blends and so on could be very good and could be very successful and very satisfying. I wrote a lot of books, 25 books, including one on wine labels, one on Bordeaux, one on French wines, encyclopedia and so on. I started annual guide. I also started, this was kind of an accident, we did a tasting of English wine versus wines from other countries. And I don't know what we were going to call it in the magazine, but my publisher came in and said, give it a better title. And so somebody, not me probably, called it, let's call it the International Wine Challenge, which was crazy, pretentious name for something that was 50 wines in a row. We invited tasters who had foreign names, basically. We had some good tasters there. Anyway, the point was English wines did very well in that tasting, surprisingly, in the days before anyone was talking about English wines. And that, the International Wine Challenge became an annual event and eventually became the world's biggest wine competition. I left it in 2005 and then came to become part of the board of Mondosvini. And in 2005, at the same time, I changed direction in many ways. So I stopped being a wine critic. I stopped running the competitions and started to get interested in making wine. Created a brand called Le Grand Noir, which is available in Romania, I believe. And the idea then was it was a revolutionary concept in the sense that it was a non-appellation wine produced in the Minevois, and we did a Cabernet Syrah and a Chardonnay Viognier. These were blends that people hadn't done, and everyone said, you'll go bust. And so we were the black sheep of the region, and we got a black sheep on the label. And today, those wines are 3.8 million bottles in 65 countries. So that's been an interesting ride. And at the same time, I've been doing consultancy, including for Moldova and Georgia, and a number of companies across the world. I've done some consultancy for Australia and different places. And ultimately, I'm just fascinated from the strategy of wines versus spirits versus beers versus other products, other drinks, either by region or by country or by company. And most recently, I've just started producing wine with a partner in Georgia, where this is the craziest thing I think I've done and one I'm most passionate for a long time, because we're making a wine that is a blend of regions in Georgia. I think we have to drive between one vineyard and the other. Furthest vineyard is probably about 6 hours. A blend of grapes. We have 10 different grapes in the white wine. A blend of techniques. We have amphora, Fevri, and stainless steel, and oak. And a blend of vintages. So I think there isn't one rule really that we haven't actually broken. But the point wasn't we were not trying to break rules. It wasn't, to me, I'm fascinated in the two threads within wine. We have one thread which is the purity of somebody wanting to express the character of one grape in one piece of soil in one place. And that is a very noble thing to do, and it's what my neighbors did in Burgundy when I lived there, and I have nothing but respect for that. And I'm buying a vineyard in La Livinière on the top of Minevois, where we will do something very much like that. On the other hand, I love chefs. I love mixologists. I love people whose job every day is to perfumiers, people whose job is to create things. And I don't see why wine producers cannot be creators as well. And those seem to be quite divergent in their the way those two ways of looking at wine are received.
Robert, what's your biggest satisfaction? The first one that comes into your head, professionally speaking.
I hope that the simple thing is, so my brand, if you like, is being the wine thinker, as you mentioned. I like making other people think. So I have two kids, they're 17 and 19, and the one gift I hope I gave them from when they were small was not to take anything anybody said, including me, for granted. So, with my kids, we have arguments all the time, and I love it. And to me, the people I feel less of a relationship with are people who listen to anybody, whether it's a business person, a politician, whoever, and listen to them and say, oh, yes. To me, I think that's a very dangerous place. I as far as I'm concerned, I don't want people to read what I write and say, yes, he's right, and then go on. I want them to say, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe I'm changing my view. Maybe I'm going to think about it again. And maybe if they still disagree with me, but they've actually thought about why they disagree with me, I've actually done as much as make them agree with me, because I love those kind of discussions and arguments. It'd be really boring if we all sort of thought the same thing. And that's true in my wine. I don't want we make 15 different wines of Renoir in France, and then now I've got these 2 in Georgia. I don't expect any one human being to like all of those 17 equally. I do, because I'm the peculiar person involved in making them. But if you say, I like this one, but this isn't my style, that's normal. That's like in clothes.
Exactly. And I understand why wine thinker and not only a wine critic or a wine expert and so on. Because very often you're talking about trends in the wine industry. Would you like to share some insights, some trends which especially the Romanian wine producers should take into consideration for the next, months, especially years, I would say?
I know we have a limited amount of time, and this is scary because there are so many and they are contradictory, or some of them are contradictory. And I would say to some producers, if you're able to think about this, if you can actually be able in your brain to be a restaurant that does very good fish and does vegetarian and does steaks, or be 2 or 3 restaurants, that may be the way you need to think in wine. So let's go through the trends. On the one hand, there is a definite trend that you will hear about towards lighter, fresher red wines in particular. You will hear about that. On the other hand, you will watch customers, certainly in the US and other places, very happily buying red wines with 14.5% alcohol and quite a lot of oak. So what we're saying is that some people want lighter red wines. Do not presume that everybody does. The danger is that when you hear that people want lighter red wines, question who is telling you this. Usually it is somebody who wants you to believe that. The same thing applies to when anyone tells you that scores don't matter anymore. Usually it's somebody who doesn't like scores. I hate to tell you, scores do still matter, certainly for the most expensive wines. They matter less for the lower cost wines, but they still matter certainly in the US, so don't ignore that. But a trend that maybe people don't know about, in the US, we see a large trend towards wines aged in bourbon barrels. This is a crazy idea for most wine people. Why would you want to put wine in a bourbon barrel? Which wine drinker would ever want to drink wine that's been in a bourbon barrel? The answer is very few wine drinkers. But bourbon drinkers, of whom there are a lot in America, would like to drink wine that's been in a bourbon barrel. And we're talking 20 or 30 million bottles a year at all of the big American brands. Now, you're not going to do that in Romania. You're not going to put your Romanian wine in a bourbon barrel, but you are competing against that, potentially. Pet nat, orange wine, the whole natural wine scene, everybody who has not heard about bourbon barrel wine has heard about natural wine. I will bet you there are fewer bottles of natural wine and pet nat sold in America than the bourbon barrel wines. But they're being sold to particular young people who are very enthusiastic. It's been a way into wine for a lot of people. It's been a way to treat wine more like craft beer. And the label's different. The whole communication is different. I'm interested in Moldova, for example. Purcari has got their new range of skin contact amphora red and white. And I think that's an interesting thing to have done in Moldova, especially because I haven't seen that much. And I'm going to be interested to see more wineries in Romania doing a bit of natural wine, some orange wine. I was doing some work with Torres recently, and they have a really delicious skin contact Esmeralda, which is made from Tramina, not in a Crevri, made in St. Isil. So I think we're going to see more of that. And of course, in Romania,
is one of the biggest.
So Rekash, and a lot of people in the natural wine world went, this is wrong. This is a big company. How can they do it? And basically, Philip Cox has made a very serious effort at making substantial quantities of orange wine. So I think that's an interesting trend. I think we're also seeing definitely, and you'll hear about it, and I referred to this earlier, the people who want to know more about the indigenous grape varieties. And I'm interested that Rekash is also doing that alongside the other things he's doing. But there is also a market for those international styles. And what I always talk about is the Haagen Dasz ice cream cabinet of wine. You go to Hanoi in Vietnam, you go to Berlin, you go to Canada. The Haagen Dasz cabinet or any ice cream cabinet has vanilla, it has chocolate, it has strawberry. There are a number of flavors that are popular across the world. Now, when you go to China, it has all of those, but you have pea sorbet, which is actually delicious. But would I try and launch pea sorbet in Romania tomorrow? Even as Haagen Dasz, I might not. So yes, there are regional styles that are successful. There are traditional styles that work globally, and I would say that Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet, Merlot, Pinot Noir, they are all in that cabinet. And then there are new styles that appear. So I am so old. I remember when caramel and salt didn't know each other. And then one day we have salted caramel ice cream. And it's a really popular style. And I would say, and we now have mint chocolate ice cream. Those are new styles that have been created, and they're now in the same cabinet as the strawberry and chocolate and vanilla. Malbec, Pinot Grigio are new arrivals in the cabinet. They weren't there before. Prosecco. And I think you need to start looking at what people are buying and why they're buying it. So Prosecco, the success of Prosecco is to not copy champagne. Everybody else is trying to make champagne. Prosecco, softer, slightly sweeter, creamier. And for a lot of people who don't like champagne, Prosecco, made by the cheaper Charmat process, it's a brilliant concept. And I'm seeing some really good examples of that kind of wine from a number of places. Lastly, I think we need to bear in mind that the move towards zero alcohol or lower alcohol is coming. And whether that's wines at 6 or 8 or 9 or 0 or 5% or whatever, that's something that a lot of producers go, oh, it's not wine. Yes, it's part of the same scene. And lastly, what do you do apart from make wine? I'm watching people have breweries, have distilleries, make vermouth, and obviously tourism. Tourism is the one that everybody talks about. I'm not even bothering to talk about. But why would you want to make beer as a winemaker? Why would you want to make spirits? Well, cash flow. It's very hard. Making wine, you pick your grapes in September. You don't sell the wine if it's a red wine for quite some time. Even the white wine, it's 6 months before you're going to get any money. Beer, we can actually make it today and sell it tomorrow. Secondly, we have a broader range of customers. We have people who may not, we have a couple come, he may like wine, she may prefer something different. So even if you're not going to go and make beer, maybe you could go and talk to the brewery down the road and say, hey, let's work together. Let's work together with the distillery. Now, last thing I'm going to say, and this is a bigger business point. Scarily, firstly, most of the wine industry does not make big enough margins, and most of the wine industry is reliant on supermarkets that don't make it easy for those producers to make enough margins. If you don't make the margin, you can't actually invest in the marketing that will enable people or encourage people to pay you a high price for your wine. So you're selling your wine at a relatively low price in retailers who are going to keep your price low. That's not a great place to be. The second thing is that we're now competing with all these other beverages. And this is a real challenge that small individual wineries have to fight. And I think if you're a small winery charging too little money, that's a very vulnerable place to be. So my suggestion is small wineries, raise your prices, sell your wine directly. Bigger wineries, you're also in a vulnerable position because you're probably not big enough. Actually think about working together with other wineries, whether you're working together wineries in your own region or possibly in other regions or even other countries. But strength in numbers. It's much easier to attract the interest of media and buyers if you've got a range of products to offer. And even if they're not all your product, I think you'll find it a way to go. I want to see Romania do well internationally. I want to see more Romanian wines on shelves and restaurant lists everywhere. But I don't have the illusion that it's going to be easy. But I do think from everything that I've seen, I think you have huge gifts in terms of your land, your grapes, and your climate and your skills. And going on from the skills, I think you have a resourceful populace that is well placed to develop a wine industry that will. I've seen it move forward a long way. We'll see it move a lot further.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think that we obtained more than we expected because we thought that the 20 minutes will be enough. Actually, it was an illusion with Robert. Even one day will not be enough in order to go through ideas, experiences, knowledge, insights, trends, and so on. Thank you again, Robert, for all the ideas and all the knowledge that you shared, not only with me, but especially with our audience. Looking forward to have you in Romania or maybe visiting some wineries when you are less busy, let's say, or just to conform your expectation.
I look forward to being back in Romania. I haven't spent nearly enough time there, so as soon as I can, I accept your invitation. Thank you for today and thank you for that.
Dragilor, vă mulțumesc că ați fost alături de noi, că ne-ați ascultat. Vă invit să urmăriți și celelalte episoade ale podcastului Wines of Romania, atât pe canalul de YouTube Wines of Romania, cât și în librăriile de podcast dedicate episoadelor în format audio. Sunt Marinela Ardelian, iar acest podcast este inspirat de programul național Deschidem vinul românesc. Ne vedem data viitoare cu un nou episod Wines of Romania Podcast. Cheers and noroc!
Noroc!
Exactly.